The question that is answered in this vision is, who will build God's house? Will God's house be built? Now, as it was with the tabernacle, so it was with the temple. The tabernacle was but an earthly figure of things unseen. We read that in the letter to the Hebrews. But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not with this creation. Thus it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. The tabernacle was an image of the real things, and the temple, of course, was the same. And the temple was not only a figure of things unseen, of the things that are real, but it was also an image, or it would become an image of the whole people of God. Now, you may remember that there was a question as to who would build the temple. That is, when the first temple was built, King David had this desire of building a temple. And initially, the prophet told him, well, go ahead. I mean, the Lord is with you. But in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 4, we read, but that same night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan. Go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, would you build me a house to dwell in? So the question is raised to David whether he would be one who would build a house for God to dwell in, for his presence to be manifest. And then the word of God continues to speak to David in this way, through the prophet, from the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. That God is speaking about what David will experience as king. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. So you see that at that time there was this desire of David to build a house for the Lord, but the Lord tells David that he will be the one who builds a house for him. Verse 12 of 2 Samuel 7, we read, when your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son, and so on. So David is told there, and remember at that time Solomon is already alive. Solomon is living. But David is told, I will raise, after you die, I will raise an offspring from you. He will build a house for my name. Now the temple that Solomon built was destroyed, and a new temple would be built. We've looked at the beginning of the book how Zechariah deals with that truth, that the people of Israel were not only allowed, but in a sense commanded to go back from exile and build a temple for the God who is, as the Persian king said, the God who is in Jerusalem. But again, as it was with the tabernacle, the temple spoke of greater things, not just of the temple of wood and stone, and the place where sacrifices were offered, etc., and where symbolically the presence of God was manifest in the Ark of the Covenant and over the Ark of the Covenant and through the lampstand and everything that was in it. But the temple, of course, spoke of greater things. Now, that temple, that tabernacle, as it were, that place of God's dwelling, there would be one day that it would be restored. The prophets spoke about it. I mean, prophets before Zechariah, of course. Amos, for example, chapter 9, verse 11. In that day I will raise up the booth, or the tent of David, that is fallen, and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old. There will be a day when that structure will be repaired. But then in combination with that repair work, it is said that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations who are called by my name, declares the Lord, who does this. So that with that rebuilding of the temple, according to Prophet Amos, there would be something else connected. And that is that nations would come, and those that would, of the nations, that would be called by the name of the Lord. So there is this combination of something that would take place in connection with a physical building, with the repair of a physical building, but that was connected with something else, something in a sense much greater than the repair of a building. And this is exactly what the church understood. In the first council of the church, in the first general assembly, we could say, of the church, where the church met in Jerusalem, as we have recorded for us in the book of Acts, in chapter 15, this is what we read from verse 12. And all the assembly fell silent, and they listened to Barnabas and Paul as they related what signs and wonders God had done through them among the Gentiles. After they finished speaking, James replied, "Brothers, listen to me. Simeon has related how God first visited the Gentiles to take from them a people for his name. And with this, the words of the prophets agree, just as it is written, 'After this I will return and will rebuild the tent of David that has fallen. I will rebuild its ruins, and I will restore it, that the remnant of mankind may seek the Lord, and all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says the Lord, who makes these things.'" So you see, the prophets saw, and the prophets spoke of things that we could say had a double application quite often in their visions or in their message. Certainly what Zechariah is seeing here has to do, without a doubt, with the task that Zerubbabel had, as we will see in a moment. But towards the end of the vision, it's very clear that it looks beyond that time to, we may say, a much greater restoration, or a much greater repair, a much greater building. The building, of course, that was referred to in the book of Acts. That building that Paul refers to when, as we were even thinking about on Sunday evening, as Paul refers to the church as the household of God, or as Peter refers to believers as the church being living stones that are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, and so on. So this vision has, as I say, this two directions. It certainly speaks about a need, or it has something to say to Zerubbabel. As we look at the elements, first of all, of the vision, we can see that it is, even for Zechariah, that was himself a priest, a very strange vision. Because what are the elements in the vision? Well, the elements in the vision are a lampstand. Once again, we are taken in this case to the tabernacle, or to the temple, as it would have been afterwards. And we are taken to see something that was part of the furnishings in the tabernacle and the temple. In Exodus 25, we have the instruction that Moses received as what had to be done for having illumination within the holy place. And in Exodus 25:31 we read, "You shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of hammered work." And then there is the description of that lampstand. And also instruction is given as to how that lamp, or how the lamps of that lampstand were to have the oil that they needed for providing the light. In chapter 27 of Exodus, at verse 20, we read, "You shall command the people of Israel that they bring to you pure beaten olive oil for the light, that the lamp may regularly be set up to burn in the tent of meeting, outside the veil that is before the testimony. Aaron and his sons shall tend it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a statute forever, to be observed throughout their generations by the people of Israel." So there was a lamp, oil was to be provided, and the high priest and the other priests were to make sure that there was always oil for the lamps and that the lamps were burning. And so what is it that Zechariah sees? He sees a lampstand all of gold, we read in verse 2, with a bowl on the top of it, and 7 lamps on it, with 7 lips on each of the lamps that are on the top of it. So the lampstand that he sees, in many ways, would have followed very closely the description that is given there in Exodus. But there are some very strange elements. There is, first of all, something that wasn't there in the tabernacle, or would not have been there in the temple. There is this container for oil. And then there is, coming out of this container, that seems somehow is on top of this candlestick, this lampstand. Coming out of this bowl, there are like pipes that go down to the lamps. Now, the language used here is not clear. Experts tell us that the language here is not clear in the sense that it may even be that what is being said, or what Zechariah is seeing, is not 7 pipes coming out of the bowl, to 1 pipe to each of the lamps, but it may even be 7 pipes for each lamp. So it would be 49 pipes that come out of this bowl that is on top of the tabernacle. And these are, of course, oil distribution pipes. Now, in the tabernacle, this would have been the responsibility of first the people to supply the oil, and then the high priest and the other priests to assure that the lamps had the oil that they needed. We read that in Leviticus chapter 24, verse 1. "The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the people of Israel to bring you pure oil from beaten olives for the lamp, that a light might be kept burning regularly outside the veil of the testimony, in the tent of meeting. Aaron shall arrange it from evening to morning before the Lord regularly. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. He shall arrange the lamps on the lampstand of pure gold before the Lord regularly." So it's quite a strange vision. And it becomes stranger because to the side of this lampstand, to each side, there are olive trees. Now, of course, this was completely out of place in the Holy of Holies, or in the holy place. How could there have been olive trees? And certainly neither in the temple. Olive trees. And these olive trees have, the olive trees themselves have somehow a way of pouring oil into this bowl. Verse 3, "There are 2 olive trees by it, one on the right of the bowl and one on other on its left." And as it's made clear that these olive trees somehow are producing and providing the oil that the lamps needed. So priests basically are made redundant, we could say. I mean, they've got no work to do. And the people, in a sense, even we could say, in connection with this lamp, they're made redundant. I mean, there is no oil that they have to bring. The priests they don't have to arrange anything because everything is done for them. So the elements of the vision are very strange, because a lamp, a container, 7 tubes or 49 tubes, and 2 olive trees. No wonder that Zechariah asks at verse 4, "What are these, my Lord?" The answer seems simple, isn't it? Well, it's a lampstand. But of course, Zechariah knows there's more to it than just what he's seeing. And the question is asked, and it is asked actually twice. In verse 5, "Do you not know what these are?" And again in verse 13, we find the same question. He said to me, "Do you not know what these are?" So Zechariah is in a way confronted with the fact that it is impossible for him to truly understand what this is symbolizing, what this is speaking about. And so what is the lesson that this vision is communicating to the prophet? As I said, we must divide the lesson in 2 blocks. There is a lesson that is a message for God's people and the work that God's people do. And then there is a message that has to do with the assurance that God people can have. And assurance that is related completely to the work of the Lord's servant. This evening we will only finish by looking at the message that is given to the Lord's people, to God's people, in terms of the work that they had to do. You may remember that at the beginning of our study of this book, I mentioned of how by the date of these night visions, the work on the temple had already begun. As a result of the work of the preaching of the prophet Haggai, work on the temple, on the rebuilding of the temple, had already begun. It had ceased for a while, but it had been restarted. And of course, the promise in the previous visions have spoken about God's powerful intervention on behalf of his people. And what this vision is showing to God's people is certainly the way in which the work that they are to do will be accomplished. And this is how it will be accomplished. We can simply summarize it like this: completely by means of God's supply. This is the way it will happen. First of all, the vision highlights the insufficiency of human resources, not by might nor by power, not by human strength, not by human organization, not by human power. The 2 words refer to not only strength but also organized strength. Human resources are insufficient, but God's provision is completely sufficient. You see, the focus is not so much in the vision, is not so much on the lampstand itself, but the focus is on how the oil is provided for this lamp to continue to give light. Israel was to be a light to the nations, but it did not fulfill its mission. They lost the land, the temple. They had lost it for a long time of exile because they had not fulfilled the mission of being light to the nations, of honoring the name of God, of living to the standards that God had set for them, so that others could say, what a wise nation, what a God, what a wise God they have. Israel was not the light they should have been, so they lost the land, they lost the temple, they lost the religious services. What would happen from then on? would this be lost again? Would Zerubbabel be able to complete the building? And if he would, how would it happen? Would it happen by his own power and strength? The nation had not managed to, in their own power, their own strength, be the light for the nations that they had to be. And so the first thing that Zerubbabel is told is basically this in verse 6. You will build a temple. You will do it. Zerubbabel, remember, is the political leader. It's the royal figure. And Zerubbabel is told, you will do it. Great, O great mountain. Who are you? Verse 7. O great mountain. Before Zerubbabel you shall become a plain. All the rubble and everything. The big challenge that Zerubbabel and the people had at the time. They will succeed. They will succeed in building the temple. And they will succeed in a way that they will rejoice. As the verse says, the mountain shall become a plain, and he shall bring forward the top stone amid shouts of grace to it. So there is this guarantee given, this message to God's people that although humanly speaking their resources have proved to be completely insufficient, by God's provision the work will be completed. You have to look to this fact that though the challenge seems impossible and the enemies are still trying to make you stop, and they will not stop trying, the work will be completed. The task of the building of the temple and this establishment of God's sovereignty, this visible establishment of God's sovereignty in the land as a testimony to others, this task will be completed. But of course, as the second part of the vision conveys, there is more to it than just the rebuilding of the temple at the time. That was important, of course. And it was essential for Zerubbabel to receive that message, to receive that encouragement, because the task was completely beyond, we could say certainly beyond, what they could reach, what they could achieve. As it is always, the task that the people of God have is always beyond our means. And we acknowledge this. We acknowledge that even the task of witnessing to others, even the task of living as we should, even the task of taking the gospel to the nations of the world is beyond our means. And so, in a sense, the message, of course, is also for us. The task can be accomplished not by means of our resources, but of course by the superabundant, perfect, sufficient provision of God. Whatever task God gives us, He provides the resources for it. Whatever challenge comes our way, the Lord has promised that He will give us what we need to confront it. But of course, there is more in the vision than just speaking to us about this sufficiency in God's provision for the task that we have. But we'll come back to this, God willing, next week. Let us pray.